One of the junior guards assigned to the entrance to the private chambers later revealed under torture, "When I saw the blood, it was already flowing from under his shoes. It was not red, not alive, but black, like oil in the devil's lamp." At dawn that day, the Pope blessed the crowd through the window of the Sistine Chapel. His hands were shaking, his voice faltered on the second psalm. His gaze darted about. Rumors spread throughout the Roman Curia that he was praying not for salvation, but for the end. Already then, 2 servants had fallen dead at the gates of the Lateran. One had choked on his own blood. The other had driven a nail into his eye socket, shouting, "Cursed be everything that does not rot." The Pope was old, thin, and suffered from insomnia, but he continued the meetings. He personally demanded that the city not close its gates or cancel liturgies. Those who die with faith will enter the imperishable kingdom. Rome was rotting from within, but in the apostolic palace they insisted that it was all the machinations of reformers and women with wombs like corpses. Doctors recommended isolation. He refused. The next day, his right leg turned black. From the testimony of his personal valet, I found that his fingers were stuck to the fabric. The flesh was cracked. A black, foul-smelling liquid oozed from the cracks. I tried to remove his stockings, but the skin came off with them. He stared at the ceiling, whispering, "I did not start this plague, but let me be the last." The court physician, Brother Serafino, prescribed bloodletting, cumin compresses, and an exorcism. But the blood would not flow. Only pus, thick and sticky like honey in hell. During the day, incense was placed in the chambers, and at night, the windows were locked. 2 cardinals submitted a petition for the temporary removal of the Pope. Both died within 3 days. One suffocated from swelling of the tongue. The other was found torn apart on the library stairs. The Pope continued his ministry. In the 4th week, he lost feeling in his left side. His hand turned black and his fingernails fell off. He had to read prayers from memory because his eyes would not open. His eyelids were stuck together. He screamed when they tried to wash them with vinegar. He screamed not from pain, but because, in his words, he saw the face of his mother, who had no face. From a report by a secret scribe left in the archives, the courtyard is filled with false prayers and the smell of rotting flesh. No one dares to touch the beds. Rats have gnawed on the legs of the dead deacon, and the servants say that psalms not found in Scripture can be heard in the corridors. The Pope himself ordered all copies of the Apocrypha to be burned, but now it is precisely these that he quotes through his putrid tremors. In the last week of the first phase, the Pope's body ceased to feel heat. He felt neither water nor touch, only pain in his stomach. His belly swelled. At the autopsy, as later indicated in Brother Felice's secret treatise, many clots were found inside, black as ash, and bubbles exuding a stench comparable only to meat left in a crypt in the sun. He did not die. He continued to speak. Every day, every night, fragments of prayers, anathemas, and quotations came from his lips, covered with ulcers. None of those present could say with certainty to whom the words were addressed, to God, to demons, to the people, or to himself. His head was shaking, his tongue was swollen, but still moving. The servants claimed that he had blessed death itself. From the diary of Gualtiero, a servant. He called for the crucifix, but when I brought it to his lips, he whispered, "Not this one. Bring me the one without eyes." I did not understand. Then he let out a cry, and I saw a worm crawl out of the wound on his neck. He took it himself and placed it in his palm, saying, "It is closer to salvation than I am." The Pope began to convulse. His stomach swelled to the size of a barrel. Black liquid flowed from his ears. He no longer recognized faces. He declared to Cardinal Sancho, who had entered, "You died long ago. I read your confession." The next day, Sancho died of suffocation in his own chambers. The deceased was guarded. Even bishops were not allowed to enter. Only a small circle of 4 people, 2 monks, a doctor, and a blind scribe, who wrote down everything the Pope said. These records disappeared after his death. Soon the French ambassadors left Rome. Then came the representatives of Naples and Avignon. An iron chain was nailed to the door of the Pope's chambers. But it did not stop the pus, mucus, and stench from seeping out. The cloth covering the entrance grew darker with each passing day. 43 days after the first symptoms appeared, the plague spread beyond the palace. In the 5th week, the tumor ruptured his intestines. When the lower abdomen was opened, a mass of black clots with live larvae was discovered. The Pope was still breathing. He was not fed, he could not swallow, but his stomach continued to swell as if it were being pumped with air. One of the monks, in a panic, covered the old man's mouth with his hand, thinking he was choking, and burned himself. Steam escaped from his mouth, with a disgusting smell of vinegar and rotting liver. The old man's skin cracked under their fingers like wet parchment. The servants, when they still dared to enter, did so with their noses covered with woolen scarves soaked in vinegar and resin. One of them described, in a report, that the fabric on the Pope's back was completely soaked with pus, and when he was lifted to change the sheets, a piece of flesh tore away from his body and white insects began to move beneath it. The cardinals, locked in the neighboring wing, tried to convene a conclave, but the stench and fear had already penetrated the stone walls. One of the servants burned the Pope's manuscript, found in the chapel, which, according to rumors, contained not prayers but confessions, that he had given Rome to the devil to stop the heretics. This manuscript disappeared. Later, a reference to it was found in a private note by Archbishop Fermo. He believed that illness was not a punishment, but a contract. Doctors put forward various theories: blood plague, black fever, internal organ failure due to bile accumulation, but everyone who tried to treat the Pope died within a week. The last one, Brother Aurelio, tried to give him a decoction of poppy roots with wine. The Pope screamed, and at that moment, part of his nasal septum fell out. The scribe who recorded the Pope's last words eventually went blind. He claimed that this happened after he heard, "The name of the one I saw in the smoke must not be written down." A day later, the scribe pierced his ears with a red-hot nail and threw himself from the balcony. By this time, the Pope was barely moving. He lay on his side, unconscious, but with his eyes open. His pupils were dark, almost blue. The monks who came to him said that he sometimes blinked, but no one knew whether he was alive or dead. He did not eat or drink, but his voice could still be heard. Not through his mouth, but as if from inside the walls, the floor, the very flesh of the palace. One of the cardinals who made his way to the chambers at night saw the body's legs move. He swore that the fingers of the Pope's right foot were moving across the floor, as if scratching out a prayer. In the morning, the cardinal was found in the library with his tongue bitten off. Riots broke out in the city. Children and animals died. Priests fell. The water in the fountains was covered with a film. People burned images of the Pope in the streets. They said that the plague did not come from prostitutes or merchants, but from the accursed womb of the Holy See. Monasteries were sealed, clergymen disappeared. One of the deacons wrote that during his nightly rounds he heard singing, a woman's voice singing prayers about the birth of a son from unclean flesh. This happened 3 nights in a row. By the 6th week, the Pope no longer spoke a word. His tongue turned black as coal, his skin was crimson, his eyelids did not close. He no longer moved. His body was warm but not alive. The flies that had gathered in the room did not fly away. Even when the windows were thrown open, they circled above the bed as if guarding it. When the doors were finally forced open and the body was carried out, a riot broke out. The peasants tried to reach the remains, shouting that the Pope must be burned. The soldiers accompanying the procession raised their shields, but the people threw stones and poured water on them. The Pope's body was wrapped in black wax to prevent decomposition. It did not help. The embalming failed. A black liquid poured out of the body's internal cavities, spread across the floor, and corroded the embalmer's skin. The doctors recoiled in horror. The remains were quickly sealed in a lead coffin, but even that swelled up after 2 days. Later, it was buried under the old wing of the cathedral, without a liturgy or the sign of the cross. 2 weeks after the burial, the library ceiling collapsed, and thick steam rose from the cracks in the stone. After the burial, a second wave of deaths began. Reports from Naples said that the bodies of priests burst into flames during Mass. In Perugia, the chapel where the Pope's old records were kept burned down. Only one surviving sheet was found there, charred, but with a legible inscription: "Death is not the end. It is the beginning of a new judgment." This phrase was copied onto walls and coffins during the night. People believed that it was not a man who was buried with the Pope, but the gates from which the plague had emerged. Despite everything, a struggle for succession began in the palace. Cardinal Arezzo claimed to have the Pope's authentic bull, in which he was appointed successor. The Cardinal of Florence brought witnesses who testified that the document was forged, and brought a doctor who stated that on the day it was signed, the Pope was unable to distinguish between blood and ink. The deceased's servants disappeared. One of them was found drowned in a well, another with his stomach cut open, and a note in his mouth. I saw him praying backwards. In the Vatican, it was forbidden to speak the name of the deceased aloud. His images were painted over, his rings melted down, and his clothes burned in furnaces, from which blue smoke then rose. However, the walls of the chambers did not give up. Even after several fumigations and the doors were bricked up, a hum could be heard from inside, like the scraping of metal against stone or the splashing of wet meat on the floor. One of the young monks accompanying the guards wrote in a letter to his brother, "We went in there during the day, but it was dark inside. The floor was sticky, and someone was breathing in the corner. When we approached, he disappeared, but the walls were warm, like a living body." Meanwhile, closed meetings began in the cities. Bishops, old abbots, and even priests excommunicated from the church discussed whether the Pope's death could be considered a sign of the end. Some demanded that the church be cleansed of rotten blood. Others demanded the immediate election of a new pope and the restoration of order. Rumors reached the kings. Allegedly, the pope had not died, but had decomposed into 2 bodies. One was buried, the other continued to live below in the crypt, feeding on the flesh of those who did not believe. A cardinal from Avignon arrived in Rome, but fell ill 3 days later. Black spots appeared on his legs, then on his face, then from his ears, and he cried out that he could see the face of the deceased pope. After his death, some of the courtiers fled the Vatican. Several clergymen attempted suicide. One of them cut a cross on his chest, saying that otherwise he would enter through his lungs. Meanwhile, secret exhumations began. The coffin was opened, according to the official version, to check for decay. The body was not only intact, but had multiplied. Inside the lead sarcophagus, bone structures were found that did not match the Pope's physique. Extra ribs, 2 lower jaws, and teeth marks on the inside of the lid. The doctors who performed the autopsy then went to a monastery of silent monks and never spoke again. The ashes were reburied in another location, in secret, without any records. However, rumors continued to spread. It was said that at the moment the second coffin was closed, a black bird with 6 wings and human teeth appeared in the sky above Rome. 3 women fainted and later died of fever. The church tried to declare the Pope a holy martyr, but the people no longer believed. One of the envoys of the King of Spain described in his report, "In the streets, children play with a skull with a crown dug up from the cemetery. Their mothers laugh." This is not fear, it is something else. People began to flee. Cardinals left Rome, cathedrals emptied, hospitals filled up. Midwives said that babies were being born dead with black spots on their chests. One newborn was found with his eyelids completely fused and his tiny tongue fused to his gums. His father claimed that this was punishment for the oath taken at the Pope's coffin. Only an old clockmaker remained in the palace. He wrote, "The bells no longer ring. They are wet. Every time I touch the copper, I hear a voice. I cannot make out the words, but it is calling." 8 weeks after the second exhumation, the Vatican officially stopped mentioning the Pope's name in liturgies. His image was removed from all altars, and manuscripts with his blessings were burned in the garden of St. Catherine, where the ground was then sprinkled with salt and closed to the public. None of the senior cardinals spoke publicly. Those who spoke of the Great Fall disappeared within 3 days. Their bodies were never found. Meanwhile, a sudden outbreak of disease began in northern Italy. In Bologna, Milan, and Ferrara, a black liquid oozed from the bodies of the dying. Doctors described it as viscous, foul-smelling, and the color of rotting liver tissue. A letter from a pharmacist in Padua reported, "The lips swell, the palate cracks, steam comes out of the mouth. The veins swell, burst, and black serum flows into the ears. Nothing helps. Frankincense, sulfur ointments, even bear fat with vinegar, all in vain." At the same time, moans began to be heard from the Vatican dungeons. Servants were not allowed down there, but several guards wrote to their relatives that they were ordered to keep their weapons pointed downwards at night. One of them, later hanged for desecrating the wall, confessed before his death, "He is coming back. His voice is in the stones. He demands a third blessing. The first was a word. The second was blood. The third will be a body." Gradually, the clergy began to leave Italy. The Archbishop of Salzburg left under the protection of 30 soldiers and forbade his servants to call Rome holy. In Germany, sermons against the Black Throne began. One of the newly elected bishops declared at a meeting, "The Pope was a vessel, but not of water. He carried not oil, but pus. His death did not purify the church. It opened up an abscess." Meanwhile, bodies continued to be carried out of Rome. Hospitals were overflowing. Morgues were sealed. People were buried in wells, in garden pits, under altars, often without a funeral service. Preachers remained silent about the Pope, but inscriptions reappeared on the walls. He is not dead. He is waiting. The real climax came on the night when it rained soot. Witnesses described how black flakes fell from the sky, covering roofs, clothes, and skin. The next morning, the smell of burnt fat spread throughout the city. Several monks died that same night with ashes in their lungs. Officially, they died of fright. Unofficially, they died from a blessing of the opposite order, as it was called in a note found in the Church of St. Clement. The former pope's entourage was completely replaced. His closest advisors either fled or were declared dead. A new group of young clergymen arrived from southern Spain and demanded that order be restored. One of them, known as Father Thomas, said, "The old is rotten. We don't need healing. We need burning." On his orders, the mass destruction of the late Pope's relics, manuscripts, robes, and even stones from his coffin began. Everything was ground up, burned, and scattered over the Tiber. However, the plague did not recede. Even newborns showed signs of a black liquid. Women lost their sight after confession. One doctor wrote, "Everyone who hears the voice begins to bleed. This is not a disease. It is the voice." The cardinals gathered in conclave, but 3 times when they tried to light the candles, they went out. On the last night, only one fire burned, in the chapel where the Pope's blood had first flowed from his feet. There, they found stains that did not disappear with soap, vinegar, or even acid. A cross was left there, upside down. No one admitted to doing it, but the next morning, the cross was gone. In its place, the phrase, "He is chosen, he does not forgive," was written in charcoal on the wall. The conclave broke up. Several participants fell ill. One died on the way. The rest left without a decision. For the first time in 100 years, the Vatican was left without a living pontiff, and with a dead man whom no one dared to name. 3 months after the last service, the Pope's name was not mentioned in any liturgy in Rome. Services were shortened. Funeral services were held in whispers. The dead were buried not in coffins, but in sacks. Priests wore masks not made of cloth, but of copper, lined with clay on the inside to prevent vapors from escaping. Their clothes resembled armor more than cassocks. According to a pharmacist who remained in the city, the Pope's body was secretly removed on the 4th night of March. 4 servants, 2 monks, and the senior doctor of the monastery hospital of St. Paul were the only ones who accompanied the removal. All 4 servants later died of gangrene in their fingers. One of the monks went blind the next morning. The doctor was found hanged 9 days later in his own pharmacy. Before doing so, he left a note. "I can feel him looking through my skin. He is not asleep. He is alive inside the liquid." The embalming ceremony itself was cancelled. The carpenters refused to open the coffin, citing creaking boards and a smell that made their teeth fall out. Instead, the coffin was filled with resin, wrapped in copper foil and sealed with wax and prayers. But even then, moans continued to be heard in the chapel where it stood, described as wet, as if someone was singing underwater. During the same period, rumors began to circulate around the city about spots around the eyes. Several women claimed to have seen the Pope's face on the walls near the fountain of St. Mark. The water in the fountain turned dark, and larvae were found in it. People who washed with this water began to delirium and died 2 days later, with blue circles around their mouths. The townspeople broke the well with hammers, but at night it filled up again. The next day, 3 of those who had done this disappeared. Outside Rome, the situation was no better. The German principalities were torn between the old faith and fear. Some ordered prayers for the repose of the Pope's soul. Others burned his image. In Angers, a crowd beat to death a priest who read a funeral oration. In Barcelona, riots broke out against the Inquisition. The population demanded an answer as to who was really sitting on the throne if his blessing had brought the plague. The cardinals, who had taken refuge in Umbria, formed a temporary council. They sent a letter to Rome asking for the remains to be gathered and burned completely. In response, the librarian who kept the papal decrees disappeared from the Vatican. 2 days later, smoke began to pour from his chambers. When the doors were opened, only an empty bed and a stain on the floor that could not be removed were found. Meanwhile, a red light was seen in the sky over Rome at night. A report from a mercenary assigned to guard the Tiber stated it appears twice, before dawn and before midnight, first as a circle, then as a flash, and after that there is the smell of blood, not metal, not smoke, blood. The last document related to this pope is dated May 7th. It is a letter written with a trembling hand by a junior servant who had previously carried incense at the funeral. He wrote to his brother, "I no longer believe in purification. He is inside us. His blood flows not through our veins, but through the air. We have become vessels. Keep silent if you want to live." A day later, he was found with his tongue torn out and his legs covered in black slime. After that, the papal archives were sealed. Some of the buildings associated with his stay were demolished. The stones were thrown into the Tiber. The altars on which he had served were covered with iron sheets. His name was cut out of official documents and replaced with the phrase, "He who preceded the void." Over the next 3 years, Rome lost its population. Only monks, guards, and beggars remained. People whispered in the streets that if you said his name at the fountain, your veins would turn black. In some houses, the walls began to bleed. One of the cardinals who returned years later died the next day. His body was covered with sores in the shape of a cross. A new pope was elected only 7 years later in Toulouse, far from the Vatican. He refused to return to Rome and never mentioned the name of his predecessor. His first decision was to officially declare the former pontiff null and void. 2 cardinals refused to sign the document, and both soon disappeared. And in their cells, a smell was found, not of decay, but of resin. The same resin that had been poured over the coffin. The last entry in the archives related to this death dates back to the 9th year after his death. It is a short comment in the margins of the chronicle. He was not a man, he was a vessel, and the vessel cracked